make sure of it.
Chapter 6. Oliver. Sunlight streamed through the window, and a scratching sound, rats, roused me from a restless night's sleep. Charlie, I groaned, rolling over on my hard-as-rocks mattress. Close the curtain. But of course Charlie could not hear me, because his quarters in my new house were below stairs with the other servants. I wrestled back my covers and stumbled toward the window. After the day I'd had yesterday, I wanted to sleep as long as possible. Apparently, Winterset had other plans. I grabbed the curtain to close it, but when I pulled, the rod broke and the curtains fell to the floor. Devil take it. I made several attempts to drape the curtain across the broken rod before giving up the fight and leaning against the window frame, exhausted. Last night, sleep had come in fits and starts, and thanks to Miss Lockwood's portrait and her unsettling smile, it had not been at all peaceful. The view from my bedchamber window was nothing special, just the overgrown grounds, but cloaked in morning mist, it appeared slightly less unpleasant than yesterday, likely because I could not yet see it clearly. As a boy, I'd risen early every morning to watch the sunrise. It was the most magical, hopeful time of day, but it had been many years since I'd risen early enough to view it. Before arriving yesterday, I'd been excited to make Winterset the Pearl of the North, but now that the estate had proved less a dream and more a nightmare, I wasn't so enthusiastic. I released a heavy breath, and the warmth fogged the frozen window panes. As I watched the sunrise, some of my agitation settled. Seeing the sun peek over the horizon, the newness of the day, made me feel more serene. Perhaps I'd been too pessimistic yesterday. I had been weary of a week-long journey and tired and hungry. Perhaps the shock of seeing the condition of the courtyard yesterday had clouded my impression of the manor. While I was still tired, having seen the sunrise, rude awakening notwithstanding, I felt more optimistic. I had the sudden urge to see the manor by the light of day and take stock of everything that needed to be repaired. Not wanting to wake Charlie, I dressed myself, grabbed my notebook and pencil, then crept down the darkened corridor toward the staircase. It was still early, so the candles had not yet been lit, but that was preferable, considering their off-putting odour I'd noticed last night. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Purchase wax candles," then closed my notebook around my pencil and descended to the darkened entrance hall. When I reached the base, the dining hall door opened, and Mrs. Owensby stepped into the entrance hall. "Good morning, Mrs. Owensby," I said.
Mr. Jennings.
She startled, clutching her heart.
You're awake early?
As are you.
I've not yet seen your manservant. Shall I fetch him for you?
No need. I am well enough dressed for the day, am I not?
Indeed,
She said, even as she eyed my unshaven face with a disapproving look that reminded me pleasantly of Mother.
but a servant should rise before his master. I will wake him and issue a lecture.
There's no cause for a lecture, I said. My usual schedule has conditioned him to both rise and retire late. Let Charlie sleep. Mrs. Owensby's disapproval deepened into a frown, but she said nothing more on the subject. Shall we get on with it then? I said.
Get on with what, sir?
Our tour, of course.
Surely not before you've eaten breakfast.
I touched my stomach, which was still protesting last night's meal.
After such a hearty meal last night,
I have no appetite this morning. I wish to see every inch of Winterset, so we best begin straight away. We can start where we left off yesterday, on the ground floor, and work our way up to the attic.
You don't wish to tour the attic?
She shook her head. Of course I do. I didn't know why that would surprise her. I intend to survey every inch of this estate.
But the attic is... well, it is haunted, sir.
I fought aside, not wishing to endure another day of my housekeeper's games. Mrs. Owensby was like the matchmaking mammas in London, the way she persisted in toying with me. Perhaps I should play along with her little games, as I had with the matchmaking mammas. Then at least we both have fun. Tell me more, I said, tucking my notebook under my arm and my pencil into my pocket. Are you acquainted with this ghost?
Indeed I am, sir. Well acquainted.
Capital. I clapped my hands together, causing her to jump. In that case, I would like an introduction. Mrs. Owensby's brow furrowed. I do not think she would be willing to accept your introduction. Now, if you will... She, I said, my attention piqued. I have a female ghost living in my house. Mrs. Owensby blinked, her eyes unnaturally wide. Oh, yes. Teasing Mrs. Owensby was vastly more enjoyable than being teased by her. You must tell me now whether she is married, I said. I should hate for her husband to call me out. Mrs. Owensby looked at the floor, worrying her lower lip. That said, if she is unmarried, that too would be a problem. Can you imagine the scandal if society discovered I was residing under the same roof as an unmarried lady? Tell me now, Mrs. Owensby, I said, adopting a serious tone. Is my ghost married?
No.
She shifted her weight side to side.
Well, she was almost married once.
How curious, I said, playing along. My ghost is engaged, then?
Was engaged.
More intriguing still. What, pray tell, is my ghost's name? She swallowed hard.
I dare not alter it, sir.
Ah, I see. You are afraid of her, I said. Never fear, I shall vanquish this ghost from the premises. I opened my notebook, wrote, "Vanquish ghost," and then showed it to Mrs. Owensby for approval.
You mustn't do that.
Her voice trembled. Gads, I had not meant to frighten the poor woman. Perhaps I'd taken my jesting too far. My apologies, Mrs. Owensby. I did not mean to make light of something serious to you. However, I do need to survey the attic to ascertain the soundness of the roof. We will do our best not to disturb this ghost.
That would be in your best interest, sir.
Winterset has a tragic enough history already. Tragic? How do you mean?
You must know this house's history.
Some of it, I said. But in truth, I knew almost nothing about Winterset. Mrs. Owensby appraised me, the downturn of her lips suggesting she thought me slow of mind. Currently, I felt it. Father never spoke of Winterset, not of its history, nor of my maternal ancestors who had lived here. Not ever. Mother spoke of it fondly, though not often. And I hadn't wanted to know. It was Father's surname I carried, and Father's family I had so desperately wanted to belong to, not Mother's. Winterset had always been both a blessing and a banishment, something I had dreamed of, but also despised. I opened my mouth to explain, but then closed it, remembering myself. I was master here, and did not need to explain myself to my servants. Instead, I made a few more notes about needed repairs in the entrance hall. Replace carpets. Repair uneven floorboards. Return Lockwood portraits.
Well,
Mrs. Owensby said.
I can tell you what I know of Winterset if you'd like, but I must warn you, it isn't all pleasant.
Please, go ahead. With a nod, she led me across the entrance hall to the study. Winterset Grange was built in 1485 and originally served as a monastic granary to Blackhurst Abbey up the lane. Sadly, the monastery was dissolved during King Henry VIII's reign, and the Crown seized and then sold all buildings. Which is when my maternal ancestors came into possession of the Grange, I said.
No, both the Abbey and the Grange were sold to the Smides.
2 decades later, your ancestors bought Winterset when Mr. Smythe's financial indiscretions forced the sale. A blow to that family, but a blessing to yours. Indeed, I said, though it was hard to think of it as such. I knew the pain that a father's financial indiscretions caused. My own family seat, Summerhaven, had been beggared because of father's debts. The entailment had prevented its sale, and Damon had ultimately found another way to save the estate from complete ruin, but its impoverishment was painful. Upon the sale, Mrs. Owensby continued, the Grange was renovated into a proper manor house. Tenant dwellings were erected to provide the new estate needed income, and finally the grounds were improved. An admirable undertaking, I said. It was, she agreed. Winterset's history is not so horrific. I was prepared to hear a terrific tale. Well, I am not finished, Mrs. Owensby said. During Queen Elizabeth's reign, when religious tensions were high, especially here in the north, Winterset was renovated yet again and served as a safe house for Catholic priests suffering persecution from the newly formed Church of England. Sadly, at least one priest perished while hiding here. That is tragic. Aye, she said, leading me from the study into the drawing room. And during the English Civil War, your fourth great-grandmother perished protecting the manor from Roundheads. Truly, I grimaced. Mrs. Owensby nodded. She loved and fought for this house until her very last breath. How many have died here? I asked. Too many. God rest their souls. My stomach knotted with guilt. I'd descended from a long line of passionate people. People who had worked to buy and build up Winterset. People who had protected the property, and those who had dwelled upon it with their lives. I'd never felt a fraction of the feelings my maternal ancestors had. I'd never loved anything enough to be willing to sacrifice, much less die for it. Would I ever? I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside it was overcast and dreary, a stark contrast to the inside, where the walls were papered in blue with tiny gold peacock plumes painted in a pattern. Sadly, upon closer inspection, the paper below the window was water damaged. Repair water damage, western wall. Remove wallpapers in drawing room. Repair window casement. We continued our tour of the ground floor, viewing first the library, then the study, and finally the dining hall. Every room required repair. Next, Mrs. Owensby led me through the kitchen and downstairs to the servants' quarters, where she, Bexley, and Charlie slept. The rest of the servants' rooms were vacant, and with all my money now needed for repairs, like it would be for some time. We climbed the servants' stairs in the kitchen to the first floor. Winterset boasted 4 bedchambers, 2 in the western wing and 2 in the eastern wing. Mrs. Owensby led me to the eastern wing first. The first bedchamber she showed me was the one I'd occupied last night, thus I didn't spend much time inspecting it. I'd already experienced its dilapidated condition firsthand. I glared at the lumpy mattress and the broken curtain rod, then made a note to replace both. The second bedchamber was in even worse condition, with peeling wallpapers and warped floorboards. I should probably save myself some time and money and declare this side of the house condemned and be done with it. The wings were connected by a corridor, which also served as a portrait gallery. As we passed through it, I didn't pay much attention to the artwork, more portraits belonging to the Lockwood family, and instead focused on the hall itself. Save a few squeaky floorboards, it appeared in good repair. What a fine billiard hall this space would make, large enough to host a good-sized party, but not so large as to prohibit conversation. I added, repurpose the gallery into a billiard hall to my list, then followed after Mrs. Owensby. But instead of continuing to the western wing, she moved toward the stairs. What about the western wing? I asked. That won't be of interest to you. Only 2 more bedchambers, and besides, it is past time for luncheon. As if the conversation were over, Mrs. Owensby began descending the stairs. But I did not follow her. When I was a boy, father had forbidden me from entering Summerhaven's east wing. For much of my life, I felt like a stranger in that house. I would not be made to feel so here in my own home. I strode toward the west wing. Mr. Jennings? Mrs. Owensby called after me, but I did not stop, determined as I was to discover what she was obviously hiding. Mr. Jennings! Her footfalls closed in behind me. Before she could catch up to me, I opened the first bedchamber door and was met with a shock of sunlight. I held up a hand to block the bright light, then blinked, adjusting to it. My gaze roamed the room, taking everything in. It was a fine room, finer than the one I'd slept in last night. Much finer. The walls were painted soft white, the ceiling high, the window wide. Mrs. Owensby caught up to me, slightly out of breath. For the record, I said, turning to meet Mrs. Owensby's gaze, I found this room of great interest. For once, she was silent. Standing in the centre of the room, I surveyed the space. The furniture was draped with Holland covers, which I removed, unveiling a 4-post bed in the middle of the room, a vanity and mirror near one corner, and an escritoire under the window. The mistress's room, likely. This was Mrs. Lockwood's bedchamber, I presume. It was, Mrs. Owensby said. At least before she died in childbirth. But most recently, this bedchamber belonged to Miss Lockwood. At the sound of her name, I glanced around the room like I might find the young lady. But of course, that was impossible. I turned in a slow circle, taking in the beauty of the space. It would be a long while before a lady, my wife, would occupy this space. If ever one would. Such a shame for a space as fine as this to go to waste. Perhaps this room would make a fine room for my hats. Turn the white room into a hat room. And then, next to the 4-post bed, I noticed a second door. What is through there? I asked, pointing. It's, well... Mrs. Owensby stammered, and as I moved toward the door, she followed on my heels. I discovered the door led to an intimate sitting room, which contained 2 overstuffed chairs and a small circular table. There was no direct access to the corridor, only the 2 bedchambers it discreetly connected. I continued through the sitting room to another bedchamber. Panelled in English oak and furnished finely, this final room was by far the largest and grandest bedchamber at Winterset, unlike the mistress's bedchamber, in far finer repair than the rest of the manor. This is the master's bedchamber. I frowned at Mrs. Owensby. It is, sir. She was not even trying to hide her disrespect. Then why, Mrs. Owensby, was I made to sleep in the smallest bedchamber last night? Because it is the farthest bedchamber from the master's bedchamber, sir. I frowned, puzzled. Do explain. I thought you would not wish to sleep in the same room that Mr. Lockwood died in, she said. Out of respect for Mr. Lockwood, or because she was being mindful of any reservations I might have. I wasn't squeamish about death, but she might be. The period of mourning has long since passed, I said, and seeing as I am Winterset's master, I would like my things moved to the master's bedchamber. Directly. She nodded, appearing resigned. With the main house tour complete, she led me back through the long gallery toward the stairs. I still wanted to see the attic, but not with her as my guide. It would keep until later, when I could explore in solitude. As we walked, I glanced at the art dotting the walls. There were so many portraits, and all of the same man. Who is this man? I asked Mrs. Owensby. That is your previous tenant, Mr. Lockwood, sir. And why are there so many portraits of him?
His daughter, Miss Lockwood, was an artist. She enjoyed capturing his likeness.
That suddenly made the portraits much more interesting. I stopped to inspect one of the paintings. It was not as perfect as the professionally painted ones that hung in the entrance hall, but Miss Lockwood had been skilled. Hands clasped behind my back, I continued down the gallery, glancing at each portrait. She painted her father from every angle, straight forward, in profile, both sides, and even one from above, which showcased a bald spot. An odd detail to commit